Chillin' like a Machiavellian. Ah, forget it. If the Florentine writer were alive today, he would have been thrilled at the number of politicians who came close to fulfilling his philosophy and got away with it. It's hard to say whether this applies to every elected official, however, since power doesn't always translate to immunity, and sometimes they do face the music of consequence. In addition, the folks who voted them in are often low-hanging fruit. Where's the skillful deception in that? So with everything said so far, who would then be considered a true Machiavellian? How about a fugitive who hasn't gotten caught? Back in 1983, a gang member named Victor Manuel Garena pulled off a $7 million heist and to this day still hasn't gotten captured, even though he's been on the 10 most wanted list ever since. Might sound like a clean getaway, but there's no indication Mr. Garena is still alive. For all we know, he could have received 2 bullets to the face the moment he met up with his cohorts. Compared to someone like James Whitey Bulger, there's good reason Hollywood never made a movie about Garena. There has to be proof of life and evidence that you got away with your dirty deed. Then there was Tupac Shakur, born Lassane Crooks, who used Machiavelli as a one-time pseudonym. He certainly tricked quite a few people, except of course the folks who ambushed him about 20 years ago. Urban legend has it that he either faked his death or was victim of the Illuminati, whatever that's supposed to mean. But was he truly Machiavellian? Growing up in the harsher hoods of California's Bay Area, which is where Crooks also once lived, I can't say that's how I remember it exactly. Before 1996, Tupac Shakur was just another mainstream rap personality, which in some opinions is not considered a rap at all. A week after his murder, a group of peers in my high school social studies class found it convenient to side with him just because a critic panned his last album. According to them, the journalist didn't understand what Tupac was all about. I wouldn't call this a loyal follower, let alone a fair weather friend, and trust me, it wasn't an isolated opinion. But it wasn't Crook's commercial success that made him a pariah. Unlike other gangster rappers, he didn't technically grow up in the hood. Well, he kind of did, but kind of didn't. In fact, his upbringing wasn't too far away from my own, which I'll get to in a bit. Lassane Crook's home turf was in a town in the middle of Marin County called Marin City, a ghetto few people know about because it's so small and difficult to access, and a big contrast to what Marin County is usually about. Fine wine, gourmet dining, antique stores, and aging radicals from 1960s counterculture. If Marin City was ever mentioned in a discussion, it was often an excuse to say that Marin County as a whole wasn't entirely white. San Anselmo, Sausalito, Larkspur, Novato, not many minorities to be found back in my time unless it was a maid or ranch hand from Honduras, but generally they didn't live anywhere close to their employers. Ah, yes, a textbook double standard of claiming to be an agent of diversity, just as long as the not in my backyard rule applies. Modern egalitarianism at its finest, but I digress. Shakur's street cred was often in question because he didn't attend an inner city school. In fact, he finished his education at the prestigious Tamalpais, where he was able to mingle with liberal wangstas who felt bad about their ivory tower privilege. Eventually, he got his foot in the water by hooking up with Shock G of Digital Underground, which was a very tame group compared to the hardcore character Tupac was later on. He certainly had his run-ins with the law. But in contrast to someone like Snoop Dogg, Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, or Eazy-E, this will be a poser. The other 4 guys at least grew up in poverty and lived the thug life to a greater extent. But who's fooling whom exactly overall? If you take a close look at it, it's the players who are really getting played by the lives they choose to live, and they don't even want to admit to it. Before I go further, let's define the subject of this video. Machiavellian, named after the writer Niccolo Machiavelli, one of the 3 dark triad personality traits, the other 2 being narcissistic and psychopathic. Machiavellian is distinguished from the others by a lifestyle of manipulating people, a defiance of moral etiquette, and an emphasis on self-centeredness. Upon first consideration, this would seem applicable to the entire gangster rap scene overall, except there's only one problem. You can't be both a professional trickster and a professional victim. It doesn't work out that way. A true Machiavellian would never make excuses for their actions, let alone glamorize them. It defeats the entire purpose of your hustle. I've had many one-on-one conversations about this issue, and to no surprise, most of them have been more defensive than logically congruent. On the subject of transgressive music as a whole, yes, quite a few other genres have their own controversy or stigma, but that doesn't mean there's any relevance to compare. Take heavy metal, for example. I can't speak for everyone, but I got into the music during a phase in my life that I'm well past. Most people get through it with a very benign outcome, and a very slim minority become casualties in some way, which makes the comparison to gangster rap rather moot. Living the thug life is generally long-term and a very risky way to kick it. Just look at homicide rates in inner cities. That's not associated with impressionable young men aspiring to become heavy metal superstars. Nevertheless, the deflectors never cease with their knee-jerk straw man reactions. I can recount on a past discussion in which the opposing side replied with something like, "You just mad because nobody listened to that gothic Aerosmith headbanger stuff. The fools from the Grateful Dead be painting their lips all black and singing about Satan and skeletons, and nobody be into that bullshit. Shit." Now, keep in mind that the original indictment wasn't against the entire rap scene as a whole. I'm aware there's various subgenres and derivatives which aren't homogenous as one. However, this particular case only applied to specific artists who promote social class warfare or encourage a criminal way of life, either in their music or philosophy. There's no denying the above as anything other than the truth. Gangster rappers themselves admit to it. Having someone confront you about it and then responding with a defensive rage seems to suggest, well, narcissism more than Machiavellianism. Another defining attribute of the N word, speaking for the personality disorder, is a split way of thinking. Everything is black and white with no gray area in between. If you live in Section 8 housing and buy your goods with a SNAP card, someone of another ethnicity who works a middle income job is the same exact individual as a Wall Street banker. Now I'm aware that this strange idea doesn't originate in impoverished communities. It's sold by university professors and media shills who deliberately push this belief because it appeals to certain emotions of jealousy and resentment. Do you remember the point I brought up earlier about who's playing whom? Well, the so-called Machiavellis in this case are clearly the ones being used to someone else's advantage, and I hate to admit to it, but I too was once fooled in a similar fashion. My old neighborhood is well gentrified in 2016, but in the 80s and early 90s, it wasn't exactly the best part of town. Liquor stores, flop houses, and seedy public parks. One block down from our house was a playground that was no longer frequented by families during the day because of all the hypodermic needles in the sand. During the first 2 years of my life, my folks lived like gypsies in basements of some really bizarre people. I was too young to remember any stories from that period of time, but I think you get the gist and idea. Silver spoons weren't exactly part of my tableware. But that didn't stop shaming throughout my childhood by classmates, teachers, and even family members accusing me of having some kind of white male privilege. If you recall the nightmarish backstories from my earlier videos, you'll find this a little puzzling, but not so surprising given the type of environment I came from. Am I better off now? Oh, sure. But part of that was owed to not spending too much time wallowing in my own sorrow and misery, or blaming other people for every misfortune. That's the standard mindset of your narcissistic bully, a lot of the people I grew up with. In the low bar below, I've included a link to some old footage of Tupac Shakur speaking at a rally. I'm not overly concerned about the racial tone of the video. Just listen to the first 20 seconds and really think about what he's saying. In case the page gets deleted or you're unable to view it, he basically complains about how other people are better off, and until he owns what they have, he's going to call it like it is. You know what that reminds me of? The younger brother or sister who has to get something you earned just for the sake of even-handedness, not because they did anything to deserve it or even want it to begin with. It's just to quell their feelings of inferiority. And that's when we kind of reach on the next question. Would a true Machiavellian care about fairness and equality? Or better yet, should he or she feel jealous of someone who better meets the Machiavellian criteria? In regards to complaints about class differences, we often hear allegations that those in white-collar jobs are more likely to get away with crimes. In my eyes, this complaint isn't really about injustice, but envy, because upper-class criminals usually deal in larger sums of money. I speak specifically about the shadowy world of securities and exchange. First off, there's no special privilege required to be a day trader or a hedge fund manager. People don't have to see what you look like or even hear your voice. All you need is a computer, an internet connection, and maybe a FINRA license. But to pull off a large scam and let it drag on for a while, well, that's a work of confidence art. You have to have some intelligence, but not necessarily high class. Don't believe me? Back in 2001, a New Jersey teenager got away with a penny stock scam by only paying a small fine and got to keep $500,000 in ill-gotten gains. This wasn't because of any kind of natural privilege, but legal loopholes that I'm sure the kid was aware of. Other gaps still exist now when it comes to microcap trading, and I'm sure sketchy investors exploit them on a daily basis. But that doesn't mean there's going to be any long-term immunity. You see, the reason crime doesn't pay is because you have to consistently be a criminal. The more malfeasance you commit, the more attention you'll get, which generally leads to comeuppance at the end. And again, social class will have no bearing on outcome. It's really a matter of what poison you pick. By deciding to live the thug life, however, you're not only dealing with smaller sums of money, but drawing attention to yourself that's likely to bring you down, either by a rival or law enforcement. Unless the day trader is connected to the mafia in some way, there's usually no violence involved with investment scams. Hence, no hot attention. I mean, what was the body count up until Bernie Madoff got nabbed for his Ponzi pyramid scheme? That's right, zero. This doesn't excuse the fact that he still committed a serious crime, but to do what he did requires a special kind of ingenuity and bravura that even I don't have. Should I feel jealous? Absolutely not, and for more reasons than one. I don't want to go to jail and have the conscience not to cheat people out of their hard earned money. It's been said that those who aren't very good liars do it for the sake of desperation. Someone who feels deprived of something is less likely to feel confident about what they say, and that's why they don't get away with it. It might become a routine because you end up lying all the time, but that doesn't mean you build any skill off of it. The driver is their inability or incompetence to succeed, which, in my opinion, is what separates the narcissist from the psychopath or the Machiavellian. The second two establish their own code, and even if all three lack impulse control, the Mac and the Psycho understand that playing the victim doesn't make for a very effective ruse. Among the more successful bosses of inner city crime, you might be familiar with the names Frank Lucas or Felix Mitchell. They were both drug dealers who built a lucrative empire in the 1970s with dope peddling and were even revered as folk heroes. However, when their own people began to suffer either by addiction, bloodborne diseases, crime, and death, it was a racist government conspiracy, not the fault of the dope lords. The same government that's ready to give targeted handouts and entitlements. Big Brother is not only ready to ruin your communities with crack and smack, but also give you free housing and other benefits. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Looking back at the urban decay of my old neighborhood, the people in charge tried to pull the same wool over everyone's eyes to mitigate the lack of accountability. You had a city council that zoned out business development and micromanaged law enforcement. The poverty of the struggling community was then blamed on greed of right wing venture capitalists. Not because the latter were in any way responsible, but because they weren't part of the welfare state groupthink. The mystery is how many people are in on this chicanery versus those who are merely pawns. Whatever the case may be, the strategy comes off as more narcissistic than Machiavellian. Narcissist doesn't really carry the same charm ring or mojo as Machiavelli, which is probably why Lassane Crooks, aka Tupac Shakur, chose the title. Or maybe he just liked the Mac part of it, like Mac Daddy. Who the fuck knows? It could be said that his catalog is, yes, among the most commercially successful for a rap artist, but compared to the accumulated album sales of the Beatles, Metallica, or Pink Floyd, chicken feed. And what was Crook's ultimate legacy? A guy who sustained the social problems and stereotypes of his own people, and defended single motherhood in a song that's as mangina as it gets. A punk ass who constantly poked his nose where it didn't belong and eventually paid the price in a rather unceremonious drive-by shooting. There would have been considerable tragedy if the killer was an obsessed, deranged fan, but no. Crook's violent conclusion was more or less a long, drawn-out suicide, disguised as martyrdom by his sick following. As we can all agree, Machiavellis are all about the self-loathing and personal destruction. A little word of wisdom for all you keeping it real thugs out there. If you think you have the game to play the system and get it made, you not only want to aim for a long, healthy, safe lifespan, but might want also to be sure that the same system you're trying to play doesn't see your vulnerabilities and end up playing you. Just a thought. Take it easy.